So thank you everyone for joining the masterclass today. We are now live on FICCI's in-house virtual platform, Byte platform. So a very good morning to all Indian participants and a very good afternoon to participants from Australia, Pacific Islands and ASEAN countries. Welcome to FICCI's first masterclass focusing on addressing plastic waste management issue under the project Indo-Pacific Partnerships on Marine Ecology. Before we commence, I request all participants who are viewing the session on Byte platform to please post your questions in the Q&A box. We will take up your questions during the Q&A session. So now, without taking much time, I would now like to invite Mr. Gaurav Vats, Director FICCI, to give his welcome remarks and share the brief about the project. Over to you, Mr. Gaurav Vats.
Thank you, Vishali, and very good morning to all of you. Professor Amanda from the Faculty of Science and Engineering, Southern Cross University, Ms. Pratibha Priya, Chief Sustainability Officer, Lucro Plus Cycle India, Ms. Shobha Raghavan, Chief Operating Officer of Sahas Zero Waste India, Mr. Les Robinson, the Director of Changeology Australia, Ms. Ricky, Executive Director of Plastic Oceans, Australia Asia. From Australia, Dr. Helen Louis, a professor from the University of Technology, Sydney, from Australia, and Mrs. Sanjeev Chand, the Director of Waste Clear, Fiji Limited from Fiji. Thank you for joining today for this very important masterclass that we are conducting. Good morning to the Indian viewers and good afternoon to viewers who have joined from Australia and Pacific Islands and other countries. I extend my virtual greetings to everyone present here on behalf of Indian Industry and Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, India's Apex Industry Association. It is my privilege to welcome you all to very first masterclass on plastic waste management under the project Indo-Pacific Partnerships on Marine Ecology, organized by FICCI with the support of DFAT, Government of Australia, and the Southern Cross University and our partner from the Pacific Island. The project Indo-Pacific Partnerships on Marine Ecology, led by FICCI along with the partner Southern Cross University, as I mentioned, the Pacific Island Development Forum, is aimed to advance the goal of India's Indo-Pacific Ocean initiatives, particularly the marine ecology pillar that is co-led by Australia. The project aims at creating awareness about plastic waste management through stakeholder engagements that are closely working in this space. FICCI sees this project as a step towards supporting an identification of practical collaborations across the Indo-Pacific, which will be explored further in subsequent dialogues organized by part of this project. The activities under this project will not just highlight the policies and technologies available to address this issue, but also include holistic deliberation between the authorities and the industry builders in Indo-Pacific region to highlight the loopholes in the current system and share best practices and experiences with each other. Friends, we all would agree that the plastic waste has become a serious concern globally. Despite their ubiquitous nature, plastics are becoming a threat to the ecosystem. To comprehensively address plastic waste, it is important to realize that plastic production, consumption, and its impact on the environment are a result of multiple activities and needs involved of several stakeholders. Reducing plastic litter by source reduction and waste management is one of the most valuable solutions to restore the oceans. An integrated waste management system with a focus on 4 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle, recover, is important to reduce quantities of mismanaged plastic waste reaching the oceans. Various measures have been undertaken by the industry and stakeholders in Indo-Pacific countries like alternatives, certifications, eco-designs, etc. Furthermore, citizen engagement and awareness needs to be created through dialogues on current policy imperatives, development in policy framework, advancement in technology, circular innovative designs, etc. So recently, the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Government of India imposed a ban on the use of selected single-use plastic items in an effort to tackle the country's rapidly increasing level of plastic pollution. The industry, besides taking these issues under corporate social responsibility, must also need to step forward, innovate, and adopt better technology for plastic disposal. So FICCI's masterclass with expert today and the waste recycling solution providers, especially plastic waste on the dais are aimed to spell out the successes achieved at the micro level that can be replicated, discuss the policies and its implementation, and look at sustainable options. Today, we have amongst us esteemed panelists from India, Australia, and the Pacific Islands who will share their views on draw the ideas on source reduction, which involves re-educating consumers and producers of plastic with the goal of optimizing the reduce of waste material at the source. Friends, we at FICCI have always recognized the importance of the relationship between economic growth and environmental sustainability. FICCI has been very actively working in the area of blue economy and circular economy. We hope this project will further strengthen the ties between India, Australia, and Pacific Island countries and build new networks and connections which will be of value to industry and the society at large in the regions. With these words, I welcome you all once again and looking forward to the fruitful discussions today. Thank you, and over to you, Vishali.
Thank you, Gaurav, for opening the session. I would now like to invite Professor Amanda, Faculty of Science and Engineering, Southern Cross University in Australia, to set the tone of the masterclasses. Professor Amanda has 30 years of experience in investigating human impacts on the environment. She has worked with communities in the Asia-Pacific region to help understand various local marine pollution issues and environmental outcomes. She is also currently the president of the Asia-Pacific Geographic Unit of Society of Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry. Over to you, Professor Amanda, for your views.
Thank you very much, Vishali, and welcome to everybody today. Looks like we've got a great audience. Really excited to be here to presenting. And today you'll have about an hour of presentations from experts in various fields. And these experts will allow you to draw information from them that will be useful in your practice and your understanding of methods and processes for source reduction. It'll also highlight opportunities where you can draw upon collaborations and start working collectively with different people to help the focus of source reduction of plastics. When we think about source reduction, we can think about it in many ways. And today, the presentations will be focusing on several angles. And for example, a couple of those. One is focused on reducing the production of plastic items in consumer goods and the reducing the manufacturing of those goods and the plastic use in that manufacturing. But the other is reducing the inappropriate disposal of waste plastics as well. So there's many angles source reduction can come from, whether we're focusing on the plastic production itself or whether we're focusing on the polluting of the plastics. So today I have a small activity for you. So rather than you just sitting passively and listening to the presentations, I want you to grab yourself a piece of paper. A4 or A3 is appropriate. A nice big sheet would be preferable. And lay that in front of you while you sit back and listen to these presentations. And of course, have a few pens with you too, maybe some marker pens, maybe a couple of colors. And as you're listening to the presentations, I want you to listen and write some keywords or key phrases that capture your attention and provide you with some consideration for your future role in the source reduction of plastics. Each of you will have a different things that are highlighted to you and grab your attention. So at the end of the seminar today, we're all going to have different mind maps or products that we produce at the end of this session. And it'll be something you can take away with you that triggers your energy into different areas of source reduction. So grab yourself a piece of paper, grab yourself a few different pens, and I'll jump in at the very end of the session and we can have a little bit of a summary about these presentations. So thank you, Vishali, for the opportunity to bring some two-way interaction into our masterclass today, and I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Professor Manda, for setting the tone of the masterclasses. I would now like to commence with the panel discussion focusing on source reduction under plastic waste management. So the topics which we are going to cover during the masterclass would be creating behavioral change using incentives and penalties for producers and consumers of plastics, strategies for minimizing of single-use plastics, use of alternative materials, focus on reuse technologies, lightweighting in manufacturing, and coming out with policies and incentive schemes for managing plastic waste. So for the panel discussion, we will be inviting the panelists for the free flow discussions, and then we will take up the questions during the Q&A round. So I would first like to invite Ms. Pratibha Priya, Chief Sustainability Officer, Lucro Plasticycle India. She'll be sharing her views on creating behavioral change and how Lucro is creating a circular plastics economy by closing the loop and highlighting on policies and incentive schemes. Ms. Pratibha is Chief Sustainability Officer of Lucro Plasticycle, an Indian waste collector, recycler, and product manufacturer that is a pioneer in developing post-consumer recycled products to achieve circular economy for plastics in India. She's also a seasoned marketing professional and sustainability advocate. Over to you, Ms. Pratibha.
Thank you, Vaishali. So what I'm going to do is probably start by touching on what I think was one of the most important bits that have at least happened in India in terms of policy in this year, which we as recyclers or manufacturers as well, or people that use recycled material have thought to be a bit of a outbreak really in the positive direction in India. So we've had new EPR regulations that have gotten released this February of this year. And I think one of the most important bits that have happened in that is that it's become now compulsory for brand owners, for producers, as well as importers to start using a certain percentage of recycled material in their rigid, in their flexible, as well as their MLP. So it's been very well categorized, and that's something that really hasn't happened in a lot of countries. And we think it's very important for people to even categorize down to the sort of basic level of the different types of plastic that are there and how much should be used, because that is the only way that you can give the industry a push to start using, to get brand owners to convince them to start using recycled material is a bit of a challenge, because no one wants to suddenly change their entire supply chain. They don't want to start using in new customers, people to buy source plastic as well, etc. from. So when these kind of policies come in place, it kind of forces them to. And again, when it forces the brand owners to start using recycled material, it gives a push to manufacturers that are actually using post-consumer recyclate in their product to manufacture more. Down to the recyclers, they recycle more. Down to the collectors, they're going to pick up more plastic waste. And hopefully down to the consumer as well, with the right kind of incentive maybe in place, where they might start doing some sort of source segregation, some sort of good source segregation, the material is actually usable for the recycler as well. Right, going to jump this because I think I've kind of explained it. Right, I'm just going to go with, explain a little bit about what it is that we do, because when we are talking about collection of plastic waste or recycling of plastic waste, we've tried to make a supply value chain where we're not, we're trying to make sure that it's completely circular in nature. We're not just making the recycled granules and leaving it for hopefully someone else will use it. We're trying to make sure that we close the loop on the plastic value chain as well, or the plastic waste as well, by actually manufacturing final end packaging solutions that use PCR material, which is post-consumer recycled material. So we're making various, secondary packaging, which we think is the most easy for a lot of brand owners, etc., to convert into. Versus primary material, because obviously primary material, they'd face a lot of problems such as, whether customers would like it or not, whether the colors would be right, etc. So which is why we moved to secondary packaging, thinking that, that's, again, most easily adoptable. And there is a huge quantity which can be changed very easily into PCR. While you're doing that, we end up working directly with a lot of waste pickers. We end up working with a lot of aggregators, NGOs, etc. There's obviously a lot of environmental benefits when you're using PCR material. To give you an idea, about a ton of recycled material gives you a saving in terms of CO2 of about 1.3 tons. Just thinking about that, I think a lot of people have actually, and we've had a lot of, like I said, because of the policies, we've had a lot of people, a lot of brand owners that have actually moved to converting into adopting PCR material as well. Right. Just going down quickly to the kind of different types of plastic products that we're able to make using recycled material. As you can see, there's a lot of things that can actually get converted to purely recycled material. And this is a mix of ocean-bound plastic as well as normal PCR, which comes from households. Right. Now, there's another model that we have been trying to use, which we have found actually a lot of success in, which is, again, trying to focus very strongly just on behavioral change of people. Now, in India specifically, paper has always had some sort of a value attached to it. So our households have always been very good with collecting newspapers at the end of the month and giving it to somebody to recycle it. And that is the kind of value we wanted people to have for plastic as well, for people to realize that there is a certain value that is attached to plastic, and it can actually be bought by someone and it can be used again. Thinking of that, we've gone to a number of sort of local municipalities within India, and we've had a lot of tie-ups with the local jurisdictions, where we've gone house to house to sort of first talk to people about the value of plastic waste, the value of different types of plastic waste. So, whether it's your bread plastic bag, or whether it's your milk pouches, your thermocol, etc. What is the kind of different value that is assigned to each thing? And simultaneously, we've set up booths in those jurisdictions where people can actually come and sell their plastic waste, and which they get money for directly in their accounts. Besides this, we've had a lot of school workshops, etc., because we think sort of targeting kids when they're younger might kind of inculcate a certain amount of value of plastic waste again in them, catch them young. So that's something we've been doing. And then a final thing that we've been doing is conducting waste picker seminars as well, because in India, at least, the first mile waste pickers are the ones that could really make a difference, where they can pick up the right kind of plastic as well, which ends up going into oceans quite a bit. Now, since we use a lot of flexible plastic waste, again, this was very important for us to talk to waste pickers about not ignoring that kind of waste, because PET is something that gets recycled very often in India. I think we have about a good 90% collection rate or a good 90% recycling rate for PET. But flexible plastic has had very bad recycling rates, and that is what ends up littering littering the oceans a bit more. So we've been talking to them again, conducting seminars, talking to them about the value that they can actually achieve from it. And if they come and give in a little bit of segregated material, what is the kind of earning potential again that they can have on that kind of plastic waste. So yeah, this is something that we've been doing, just running through a few images of community engagement, how we go about door to door talking to people about it, the kind of school workshops that we've been doing right at ground level to talk to kids about the importance of segregation, because again, that has been a very big problem in India. The collection drives where we have e-waste vehicles that actually go and pick up the waste along with people coming and sort of selling their waste directly to us. And then again, finally, the waste picker seminars where we talk to them about their earning potentials by picking up the right kind of waste as well, or picking up all kinds of waste, but some certain types of waste that they probably weren't aware of in the past. Now, just going back to policies a bit, I think the one thing that, obviously the one positive thing that has happened, I've already covered that in India. I think the one thing where we might be lacking a bit is some sort of a regulation on source segregation, which hasn't happened yet, and which is what makes recyclers like us face a little bit of a challenge, because when it's not compulsory on ground level or at the first level to segregate your waste, it becomes a bit of a problem as it moves ahead. So I think with that, I'm going to stop it. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Pratibha. You have rightly raised a valid point that there's a need for regulation on segregation of waste in India. So moving on, I would now like to invite Ms. Shobha Raghavan, Chief Operating Officer, Saha Zero Waste. She will be sharing her views on implementing single-use plastics ban in India to achieve a zero waste corporate campus and complexities of plastic waste management in material recovery facility. Ms. Shobha strategizes overall operations to ensure growth and scale up of a niche industry. She's been associated with the organization for last 9 years and has been constantly evolving various business models as per the market demand. Over to you, Mr. Raghavan, to share your views, please.
Vaishali, you can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Good morning. Very important topic, both globally and at India. And I would like to focus on corporate campuses implementing the SUP ban. But let me just start with the fact that while we are trying to address this plastic waste challenge through the SUP ban, it is only scratching the surface of the broader challenge of mismanaged waste. This is only one of the latest approaches we are talking about, the managed waste system in the country and globally. Hence, it would be good to take a step back and lay the foundation correct. And waste management has to become a top priority and has to be a top-down approach in corporates and needs to be leadership driven, which starts with a corporate policy on waste management within the campus. The road to zero waste then becomes systemic with distributed responsibilities across various stakeholders in the corporate campus, starting from the corporate employees, the facility management teams, the food vendors, and the waste management service providers, who then support on different parts of the problem statement and the supply chain. Now, this again further strengthens with deep training and engagement programs on specific responsibilities, which then drives the required behavior change. While we need to work with the food vendors in order for them to have their own cutlery and serving it in reusables, the employees need to have a mindset change to not expect to take food away in takeaways and get out of their use and throw culture. And this aspect reinforces the reduction aspect of waste. Facility management teams should be trained again and empowered to return back the unsegregated waste firmly and politely. Waste management service providers within the campus need to share these monthly reports on segregation levels, the amount of waste that's been diverted to landfill, the different types of SUPs, and why SUPs, why not SUDs, single-use disposables also, and then track it down to the source and identify who are the people within the campus which are generating this kind of unacceptable waste streams. Now, with this, the entire approach then becomes policy driven with a closed loop mechanism that is stringent, at the same time participatory, inclusive, and can drive operational excellence and innovations. Again, the right proportion of incentivizing, penalizing will bring a good balance of monitoring and also enables building internal champions for sustaining these efforts. So this is all these aspects have come through a case study. We've been able to do this in many campuses in Bangalore, and hence we thought we could share these insights of how this could be replicated at scale. Vaishali, if you could just share the presentation I'd sent, I would like to discuss on the next aspect of challenges that we have at our material recovery facility, the waste that is coming into our material recovery facility through collections from the different corporates, the different corporations, the different waste pickers we are associated with. Vaishali, would you be sharing this screen?
Yes, my technical team is doing.
Yeah. So in this next section, I really like to focus on why it is becoming important for behavioral change, and a second important aspect that's being uh, discussed is on the recycling side, because even with the behavioral change on the recycling side, we still do have problems. It was good to hear from Lucro on their operations around recycling and the capacity building on the supply chain. Can you just move to the next slide, please? Yeah. So I want to touch upon this one very important problem that we are facing, which is a very real-time issue: unaccepted materials. Now, if you see the first picture on the left side, it is nothing but PP, and it is in thermofoam form. 45% of our PP material is this. And I'm sure you can see this coming into many of the offices, many of the houses, because these are coming from the takeaway, food takeaway packaging. Second, if you see on the right side, this is also PP, and these are thin-walled plastic containers. This is almost 30% of the PP category of plastic waste. And you realize that both of these materials are not accepted by recyclers. One, because it is contaminated with food. And second is maybe they do not have the right technology to process this kind of PP. So this is in abundance. However, this is not readily being accepted by the recyclers currently in the country. And next, what is the material they will accept then? So on a preferred side, what are materials they prefer? If you see this, the left side, the type of PP they want are these kind of paint buckets and other buckets, and you have these lunch boxes, which are like that kind of rigid plastic is what they're looking at. And on HDPE side, they're looking at, if it's not all the HDPE that they can take, they're taking only natural color, black color, and gray color. An example I've given you are the washing containers like Harpic and Lysol. These are the these are the containers they prefer. Now, if there is a pick and choose, and if you are going to do cherry picking of this whole thing, then there is a problem with the supply chain. The back end is not ready for recycling, and the front end is generating only these types of waste. And because you're booming, the economy is booming with all the e-commerce food takeaway categories. So can you see the disconnect between the front end and the back end? Last slide, please. Then apart from unaccepted material, apart from the material that is cherry picked and required, there is a hard to recycle items, which are, if you see, flexi PE, which is a material that is highly available in the market, but it's difficult to distinguish between these materials. For example, there are dustbin liners now, which are plastic PE, which are flexi and also are compostable. And we do not have any technology now to test whether it is compostable or it's a plastic. After all, it's manual work happening in the material recovery facilities, and the kind of scale of waste that's coming, there is no way we can recognize it. So how do we distinguish and send and sort it and give it to the recycler? Similarly, you have very complicated plastics coming out of electronic waste like keyboards, which are a mix of HIPs, ABS, and some resins, which are very futuristic resins, again not able to identify, and therefore what happens is recyclers do not accept it, or they don't have a technology ready for it, and hence these are just getting dumped or downcycled and not truly recycled. And lastly, you have the milk sachets, which we have seen for so many years and continues to be the best form of delivering milk to our doorstep, the LD and LDPE materials. Now the problem is the milk sachets are contaminated. Obviously, it's a very natural system. It is very difficult to sort because it is obviously contaminated with milk. And by the time it reaches the recycler, it's a couple of weeks or couple of months after touching many waste picker and aggregator hands. And then it becomes humanly difficult for people to actually sort it because it has a stench in it. And it develops maggots because it has moisture in it. Now, on the recycling side, the least we expect is they put a sophisticated washing and drying line so that they get the right quality of pellet, which can then bring in this sachet to sachet or cradle to cradle system in this recycling. So I wanted to bring about on the recycling side because we are one point ahead of the recycler on the supply chain, having set up a material recovery facility, these are some of the challenges we continue to face with the kind of waste materials related to plastic that end up in our factory. Happy to hand it over to you, Vaishali.
Thank you, Ms. Raghavan, for highlighting these issues. Moving on, we would now like to invite Mr. Les Robinson, Director, Changeology Australia, to share his views on psychology of behavior change. Mr. Les Robinson is an expert on the human dimension of change. He has trained thousands of practitioners in fields like health promotion, sustainability, natural resource management, road safety, and emergency management. Over to you, Mr. Robinson, for your views.
Les, you're on mute.
Thank you for that. So, thank you so much. So, all of us are involved in the task of reducing the amount of marine plastic. That requires people in government, people in business, people on the street, people shopping, to do things they're not doing now. Small things and large things. And that's what we call behaviour change. I've been given the challenge of, in just 10 minutes, giving everyone a crash course in how to do behaviour change. I'm going to use as an example people doing the right thing with their litter. So what are we learning about good practice behaviour change to do with people contributing to source reduction by not dropping plastic bags and plastic containers all over the place? Here we go, everyone. Can I do this in 10 minutes? Firstly, I'm going to talk about 6 different practices that we can put into place. The first one is, if we're working with people, can we show them how to do the thing that we want them to do? Can we make it familiar? So don't tell people what to do. Don't show people pictures of bins. Show people using bins. Show people in business using new products. So when people need to be able to see exactly what to do so they don't feel afraid of it anymore. So can we make it familiar to them? Can we make the action familiar? The second thing that makes a big difference is that people need to feel good about what they're doing. If we only talk about problems, we wear people down. People want to run away from problems. So can we make the whole feeling of everything we do positive? I love that one from New Zealand there. Love New Zealand, recycle with care. It's a really positive message. Thank people for doing the right thing. Celebrate doing the right thing together. If people have only done small steps, thank them for the small steps they've done. So the more positive we can be, the more people will be attracted to what we're doing. One way to do it, another way to do it is to make it a game. Can you see this example here? It's a device that helps people reduce cigarette butts by choosing who is the best soccer player. And they put the cigarette butt in the hole. So it's like a game. Here's another lovely one, using bins like a game. They become irresistible. Here's another one here. It's like a trail you follow to put the right material in the right bin. So it's having fun with people, and that attracts people as well. Or just use humour. You know, we don't use humour very much in this business. It makes a big difference when we do, because people love humour and they're attracted to it and they want to talk about it. And they want to, instead of running away from us telling them what to do, if it's funny, it avoids that resistance that people have to messages. The third thing that makes a huge difference is the thing we ask people to do needs to be easy. How can we make it easy to act? And when it comes to consumer source reduction, it's very much about bin infrastructure. Can we make sure the right bin is in the right place so that the action is easy? No matter what the action is, what can we do to make it quick and convenient and easy for anyone to be able to do? That makes a huge difference. The fourth thing that makes a difference is visibility. People should be able to see that there are commitments being made by other people, commitments by business, commitments by communities. So can we visualize it? Can we put up big signs? Can we put chalk on the ground? Can we put stickers on businesses? The more visible it is, the more it looks like it's a movement that people can be part of. And people are proud to be part of a movement that's making a difference. I love this one from the Melbourne markets. We are proudly plastic bag and straw free. So if people go, oh, I didn't know that, now I'm motivated to join that movement. The fifth one is, can we make it normal? Can we make it seem that lots of people like you are already doing it? So any message that creates that sense of, I'm not asking you alone to make a difference, but I'm letting you know that so many people like you are already doing it, already doing the right thing. Any language used, like bring your own bag. It's how we shop here. Oh, sounds like everyone's doing it. Or showing pictures of lots of people doing the right thing. If we're talking to people in government, lots of pictures of people in government doing the right thing. In business, lots of pictures of people in business doing the right thing. People want to be part of a movement. Can we show a movement? Another way to do that quite subtly in this case is by changing the environment. So places that are littered attract litter. Places that are cared for and loved, people want to care for and love them. So yeah, how can we make the whole environment one that tells the story, not just our messages? Can we involve the communities in caring for places so places feel loved? If they're loved, they're less likely to be littered. Be very wary when you're using this message that lots of people are doing it. Be wary of not accidentally advertising the wrong behaviour. A message like 1.6 million pounds of litter are produced on this freeway every year, it sends a message about what's socially normal. People think, oh, well, this is a community that wastes lots of litter, so if I want to fit in, I guess I'll waste litter as well. So we need to be very careful about our language. Always focus on demonstrating the positive and heroing the positive rather than the negative. And lastly, people are influenced by other people, more than they are by messages or advertising. Meeting a person who is passionate and cares makes a difference to people. It's contagious. We want to be as passionate as those people are. And we want to follow people who are passionate as well. So when you find someone who really cares, put them in front of the TV, put them in front of the camera, have their words out there, use them, put them on the internet so that people can see the faces and the joy and the positivity of people who are out there doing the right thing and making a difference. It really does attract human beings. And the last thing I'll say is when we do this kind of behaviour change work, it's important not to think we already know the answer, but to proceed by experiments. So I say start with small experiments in your community or your place, or if you're working with businesses, with a few of those businesses, and try to find out what will make a difference. This is an example here of a council in Sydney that was trying to reduce waste in parks, picnic waste of people having lunches in parks. And they tried 5 different methods to see which one worked, and they counted the litter after each time. So they carried out a scientific experiment. They found that having enforcement officers present to threaten people only reduced a 3% reduction in litter. They found out that having life-size cutouts, which look like this here, where's our life-size cutouts? Oh, there, you see the life-size cutout there of a person putting it in the bin. So using those life-size cutouts produced a 17% reduction in litter. Having litter pickers visibly picking up litter in the park produced a 19% reduction. Going around giving people bags to put their litter in produced a 22% reduction. And having people go around who are educators talking to people produced a 56% reduction. And what's really interesting there is which made the biggest difference. It was when you met a person. It was when you interacted with another human being. Those are the things that made a big difference. So this local government did the smart thing, and they carried out a small-scale experiment before being certain about what their strategy would be. And in the world of behaviour change, it is complicated. We're never sure of exactly what the answer is until we try something on a small scale, see what works, and then proceed to invest on a larger scale. Now, I had 10 minutes and I've only used 8 minutes. So, but that's all I have to say, everyone. Oh, one more thing. That is, it's really good to have a look around the internet and see what's there that tells us what is good practice. And when it comes to litter, there's a book on litter here called Literology, which is a compendium of great practice. So if you're involved in helping consumers not drop plastic bags all over the place, this is a great starting point. But every field will have similar material on the internet that we can look at and become well informed before we design our projects. There, I have used up 9 minutes so far. So thank you very much, everyone, and my best wishes for your work.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson, for highlighting your views on behavior change. I would now like to invite Ms. Ricky Hersberg, Executive Director, Plastic Oceans Australasia from Australia, to talk about bottom-up drivers for change, highlighting on industry leadership and consumer demand. Ricky has a diverse professional and academic background, previously holding senior management positions with WWF, Greening Australia, UDIA, and Hilton International Hotels Group. Over to you, Ms. Ricky, for your views, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you see my screen?
No.
No.
Can you
Maybe
please share it again?
Maybe if you share the slides from your end, that might be better.
Okay, please allow us a minute.
Okay, thank you. I'll already start. So thank you, Les. It was fantastic to hear your presentation. And I'm going to be adding to what Les is talking about in the behaviour change space. So I'm going to be talking about Les was talking mostly about individuals and the community, and I'm going to be talking about businesses and government entities and big corporates. So for my presentation, I'm going to really be emphasising what you can do on the different levels and talking about policy, advocacy, about penalties, incentives, and about basically from the bottom up. So my presentation is talking in a different way about going up the way and down the way. So today in particular, I'm going to be talking about from the bottom up. So thank you for the first slide. So generally speaking, government provides regulation and pushes down from the top down of what they want us to do. But our philosophy and what we do at Plastic Oceans Australasia is we talk a lot to people about actually driving change from the bottom up. So we're talking about if the businesses and the communities actually walk the talk and make that change, it really helps a lot in systemic change long term. Next slide, please. So this is, I wanted to equate this. So we obviously talk a lot, we work a lot about the oceans and marine life, and we talk about what we're trying to do to stop plastic waste getting into the oceans. And one of the things I thought that would be really helpful for the masterclass today and for people to think about the correlation between us and the ocean, starting from the seabed and working all the way up to the top. So it's the opposite of what we would probably think. So I look at the community at the bottom in that first blue section being the algae and the small fish, and basically, as I call the feeder fish. And those are the ones that are us. That's the masses of people, everybody out there that includes all those individuals to make a community. And they're really, really important because without them, that's the skeleton, that's the nutrients, that's our vitamins of life. So the community is super, super important. And then going up to the next level is the driver fish. And those are the people that are the leaders that have businesses or corporations. And they're the ones that are feeding, are getting their nutrients and feeding from the community, because without the community, they wouldn't have a business and their business wouldn't be sustainable. So I wanted to share this analogy with you for people to think about the supply. We're talking about supply chain going up the way and down the way. And then the big fish being at the very top of the chain, we're talking about the shark or the whale or the dolphin. And they're the ones that, drive change back down based on the information that we share with them. So I wanted to use this analogy to really help think about systemic change. And, the information that's been provided by the other speakers with what's happening in India is really, really interesting in that, because systemic change takes a really long time. It's taken us 70 years to get to this situation with plastic and plastic waste. We took 70 years, and now it's going to take a while for us to make that change. It's not going to happen overnight. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk about with the government and talking about the big fish at the top and what that means is we in Australia, we've looked at a few things here about incentives and penalties. And again, piggybacking off what Les was saying, in Australia, it's really interesting. We have a number of bans that have come in across various states. And the only state that we have a ban in that I could find anywhere in the system that actually applies a monetary ban is actually in Queensland. And Queensland, for most of you, that's where the Great Barrier Reef is, and iconic landmarks and ocean marks for the world. But the penalty that they give, so this is particularly for supermarkets when we were stopping the plastic bag ban, the fine is 50 penalty units, and that actually equates to 6,893 Australian dollars, which is actually not a lot of money when you think about the size of supermarkets. And that's the only ban officially with a penalty that I could find on any of the states within Australia when I was asked to do the Masterclass talk. So I thought that was really interesting, because it's not really it's not really discouraging supermarkets and retail chains, but it is a ban. So there is a penalty there if you do sell a plastic bag in a store. Rather though, one of the things that I wanted to share is in Australia, we have the return and earn can bottle system with containers for change or return and earn through Tomra, etc. And that's been around for quite a while, where you get 10 cents back for bringing back your bottle. Now, I remember as a kid back many, many years ago, we had that already for cans in particular, where you got your return back on a can. So this is a really, giving you money back for returning your bottle, to me is mixed messages for people. It doesn't really, it's not enough. It means that you're still okay. You're saying to people, it's okay. You can still go buy your plastic bottle because you're going to get 10 cents back when you put it back in the right machine. So I'm not sure. I'm in two minds about whether the return and earn is really that useful and long-term, whether it's the right approach. I would rather recommend a plastic reduction offset scheme. And I think that this would be, like our carbon reduction offset scheme, would be a much better way to go. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just show you about how our bans have worked. And I know that you have talked about the bans in India, but one of the things that's really confusing in Australia, and this is another thing about going from the bottom up rather than the top down, is that the governments in different states across Australia are all putting in different bans at different times with different products over a period of time. So if I live in one state and then I travel to another state, I have to try and remember, are we banned on using straws in ACT or Queensland or South Australia? Oh, no, that's okay. We can do it in the other states. So it's really, really confusing. And I think that having a plastic ban, do they work? If it was unilateral and we had a unified approach, I'd say absolutely. It would be fantastic. Very, very clear messaging, just like our bin system in Australia. Every different council has a different bin system within a state, and then you've got all the different states. So I think there's still a lot more work that we could do, and there's a lot more to learn about that. And I think to do source reduction and source regulation, I think we all need to be a lot more unified. And I think the community through the businesses can drive that change. Next slide, please. So one of the things I wanted to share with you is a solution to that. So systemic change takes a long time. We have a program which includes waste reduction, a way to empower people to make change, and also it looks at the sustainability credentials. So your sustainable development goals through UNESCO, your environmental sustainability goals that you need to tick the box off for your company. So we have a program which is, again, off the back of what Les was saying. We want to drive behaviour change with businesses with a solution-based approach. And this is a long-term approach over a 12-month period, but you can really track the methodology with surveys, audits, going through the whole life cycle of what a company is doing. And that looks then down at the community, not down, but alongside their community, going back up to what government's doing. Next slide, please. So the solutions-based program, basically with six stages. I'll go through this really quickly, looking at what is your organisation doing, walking the talk, and looking at what's happening in your own backyard. It's really important for a company and a community to look at what they're doing. Then look at diagnose the system, and is that working? Take that system and look at what others are doing and bring them on the journey. And from that, from 1 to 3, you can look at what works and what's happening within other organisations within your community group and come up with some pioneering practices of what you could do to make a change. And this is really relevant when you talk about plastic. Plastic waste is the most difficult one to get rid of. Every single piece of plastic that's ever been here today is still produced 70 years ago, is still with us today, bar the ones that have been burnt. So burning and going into the atmosphere and into the air, that's the only one where it disappears, but then you've got air pollution. So that's another whole story, which we don't have time for today. And then number 5, sustain your transition through technology and innovation. So I'm always saying to organisations, whether it be overseas, in Australia, New Zealand and other island areas, to look at what we could do to make that change through what you've got at hand. So we're looking at your culture, at geographic locations, we're looking at scaling of economies of scale, looking at what the barriers to entry are within your area where you live and using what you can. And then only then can you make systemic change in marine waste, because it really is a very long-term strategic plan that's needed with an organisation, and the organisation is fueled with amazing brains, and everyone as an individual creates that community within the organisation and then pushes it up. And when you go up to the government and make your voice, the government then needs to look and come back down, and it's partnership. You have to work together. There's collaboration. And why do we have people in government? Because we elected them, because we want them to help us to make that change. So the voice of the government is the voice of the people, and it's very much about the policy, about advocacy and campaigning going up the way, rather than the government saying we must do this, this and this, which doesn't really work. It doesn't empower people. It doesn't give people an incentive to actually make a difference. And it's the power of the people. Plastic is one of the hardest, difficult problems to solve, and it really needs a unified approach. Next slide, please. That's it. That's me. Back over to you, Vishali. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ricky, for sharing your views on bottom-up drivers for change. So moving on, I would now like to invite Dr. Helen Louis, Adjunct Professor, University of Technology, Sydney in Australia, to share her views on alternative materials and lightweighting in manufacturing. Dr. Helen has been actively engaged in product stewardship for over 25 years with various positions, including as a consultant to the Australian Packaging Convenient Organisation, Director of the Centre for Design at RMIT University, and Environment Manager for Plastics and Chemicals Industries Association. Over to you, Dr. Louis, for your views, please.
Thanks, Vishali. Let me just open up my slides. Can you see the slides okay? Ooh.
Yes.
No, wrong one. You're not supposed to see that, are you? Let me just try that one again. No, it looks like you might have to do mine as well. Let me just... No, I'm not sure how to get that one. Oh, here we go. Maybe I'll just quickly go through this one. Is that okay? Can you see that?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, I'm talking about...
Make it full screen.
Sorry?
If you can zoom, like make it full screen.
Okay, there we go. A bit better.
Yeah, better now. Yeah.
Okay, I'm talking about alternative materials, but within a circular design framework, I guess, and with a particular focus on marine plastics. I wanted to start with some principles for decision making, because we are seeing a lot of people rushing out of plastics into materials that may have unintended consequences or aren't really the right approach. So I thought I'd start with just a few of these. First of all, if a company is looking at an alternative material, you have to be clear about the objective. And is an alternative the answer? Is it about, designing for recovery, or is it about reducing litter? The answer that you're looking for might be different depending on what you're trying to do. Second, very importantly, we need to follow the hierarchy. We need to try to eliminate first. We need to look at other options for reduction, like reuse and refill systems. We need to look at lightweighting. Can we, use less material to deliver the same function? We could redesign to reduce the impact in litter. And then after thinking about all of those things, is there a better material to deliver the outcome that I'm looking for? We also need to think about the whole product or packaging system. For example, if a company is looking at switching from a conventional plastic to, let's say, a compostable plastic, is there actually a recovery system in place that people can access? If it's redesigned for recycling, is there a recycling system in place? And we heard before about the problems recycling some of the polypropylene and some of the flexible materials. So we need to look at the whole system. We also need to look at any potential adverse impacts. So just quickly, some of the options that companies need to think about along with alternative materials. Avoidance, very important. I love this one. I mean, it's pretty obvious, but Surf Laundry brand is eliminating the plastic scoop in Australia, and I think elsewhere in the world. In Australia, they're expecting to avoid 1.9 million plastic scoops every year. So that's a real win. Lightweighting, very important. This is just a new lightweight tube that's been developed by Hoffman Neopak, but we're seeing lightweighting across the board for many products because it's a way of using less material and hopefully saving money as well. Now, reuse, we heard a little bit about that from Shobha. We're seeing a strong growth in reusable cups, food containers, cutlery, and so on, particularly in the food service sector. And that needs a combination of behaviour change and setting up systems and working with food vendors and others to make sure that the systems are going to work. Refill, there's a lot of potential for refill. This is just one example. Unilever in Melbourne, Australia is trialling a refill system for detergents. Once again, that's one of those big systemic shifts that Ricky was talking about. We need to change behaviour. We need to set up systems where it can be done and done well. Redesign to reduce the impacts in litter. This is a really important one. If you've ever picked up litter on a beach, you'll know that there are lots of plastic bottle caps. They're one of the most common items, at least in Australia. The European Union has now banned any bottle that has a separate cap. They have to be tethered. So this is such an obvious solution that we need to see globally. Design for recovery. This means designing either for a composting system or a recycling system. Using recycled materials, we are seeing some companies starting to use ocean plastics, which are either plastics collected from beaches or that could have become ocean plastics. But using recycled plastics helps that circular system to work. Now, one of the most common solutions that people are looking at the moment is replacing plastics with fibre-based packaging, particularly for food service, but also in other applications. Just a couple of examples. Nestle Pakistan has replaced all of the straws in their ready-to-drink, their RTD products, with paper straws. We're also seeing paper straws being used in some of the food service sectors. Snack packs, another one of the common sources of litter is plastic bags and plastic sachets. Nestle has just shifted their Smarties brand, a very popular brand, from plastics to paper, which sounds simple, but actually took a lot of R&D to meet all of the supply chain and functionality requirements with paper. But that's to be rewarded, to be recognised. But using fibre-based, once again, we need to think about the design principles. Using fibre from sustainable sources so that we're not causing any unintended environmental impacts. For example, forest stewardship certified, using recycled materials, using waste materials is another one. I read yesterday about a new factory in Australia that's going to be making fibre-based packaging from 100% agricultural waste sourced locally in Australia. Design for recovery, avoiding polymer coatings. You'll know that things like a coffee cup has a plastic coating. We don't want to see single-use plastics replaced with non-recyclable, non-biodegradable polymer-coated plastics. We're also seeing more concerns about PFAS, which is the chemical used for grease-resistant and water-resistant packaging, which can be a hazard and contaminate compost. Now, using alternative polymers, I guess one of the big things is that we're seeing a lot of confusion about terminology. Bio-based plastics are made mainly from plant-based materials. Biodegradable, okay, it will break down, but over no particular time frame. More importantly, we're looking for compostable plastics that will break down in an industrial composting system. Oxo-degradable, to be avoided. Those are the synthetic plastics with an additive, so they break down faster, but that just produces microplastics, and they are being banned in Australia and elsewhere. Then we've got recyclable, recycled, ocean-bound. So we do need to agree on some of these terms and educate people so that they understand what they actually mean. I'm not going to go into detail a bit about this, but just to know that a bio-based plastic, let's say made from plants, isn't necessarily compostable or recyclable. Some of them are compostable, like PLA, for example, it's quite common. Some of them are recyclable. We're seeing polyethylenes and PET made from sugarcane. And then we're seeing some compostable polymers that are made from fossil fuels, from gas and oil, which may still be the objective, but it just once again comes back to that framework. What are we trying to achieve? And there's a lot of resources that have been produced on this. Search the internet, as Les said. There's a lot of very technical guidelines on the different terminologies. I'll just also mention there was a big report that was produced by the UN Environment Programme on biodegradable plastics and marine litter, which said we really don't have enough evidence to say whether they are better or not. They will still break down very, very slowly. So whether they are a benefit or not is still to be determined. So yeah, don't rush to compostable plastics to solve the litter problem, although they are probably better than a conventional polymer, but still to be determined. So in conclusion, I guess some high-level comments here. First option, we need to phase out problematic and unnecessary single-use plastics wherever possible. If it's a necessary product, consider new business models, reuse, refill, lease, share, etc. Redesign to reduce the chance of litter, for example, tethered caps, very important. If it's necessary and likely to end up in a marine environment, then consider paper as the best option, but design it appropriately. If paper is not an option, consider a compostable bio-based polymer, but keep in mind that we need more research on the potential benefits and impacts. So that's something to keep in mind. And that's all from me. Vaishali, back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Louis, for sharing and highlighting the takeaways also on the important topic of alternative materials. So I would now like to invite our last panelist, Mr. Sanjeev Chand, Director, Waste Clear Fiji Limited from Fiji, to share his views on current status of waste management in Fiji and highlight on policies and incentive schemes uh, adopted in the Pacific Islands. So, Mr. Sanjeev is CEO and founder of the Fertile Factory and Company. Sanjeev immigrated back to Fiji from California in 2012 to join the family business, the Fiji's largest waste management haulage company, and was made partner and director of the company in 2014. Over to you, Mr. Sanjeev, for your views.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me. I would like to touch on a few things. Firstly, on some of the problems that we have in Fiji with waste. The other would be what we have done as a business. And then, before I start on that, would be to do with what policies that have been put into Fiji. I'll close off by kind of giving my opinion on how waste is handled in Fiji. So firstly, Fiji has banned single-use plastics. I think that was in 2020 or 2021. And there was also a big push on banning all polystyrene, if I'm not mistaken. So then there was a government incentive area where there's Fiji's only landfill. It's called Namboro. So any business set there for the purpose of recycling had really good tax incentives and tax holidays by the government. So from the government's perspective, and there's been a huge push into recycling of all sorts. Now we are a family business, and we've been in waste for almost 18 years now, I think. And when I joined, the biggest problem that I saw with waste in Fiji was that there was a huge divide between the municipal and the private sector. And the municipal councils only cater for waste in the so-called urban areas, which is very limited. So all the peri-urban and the rural areas, there was basically no outreach. So in terms of plastics now, there's Mission Pacific, which is Coca-Cola that recycles plastic here, which is just PET bottles, which is kind of very specific, but the volumes are fairly low. But besides that, there are no real alternatives to recycling of any type of plastic in Fiji. Now, you imagine Fiji is less than 1 million people. The population is barely 900,000. We see over 900,000 tourists come into the country every year. So the island has to basically cater for its own, and whatever its weight is in terms of population, that's how much waste is coming into the country to cater for the tourists. So like I mentioned earlier, there's one landfill, the other are all rubbish dumps, which are mostly located around the coastal areas. So, as a company, what we have done is Winston, our tropical cyclone Winston, I'm pretty sure you all heard of it. So that was very devastating. And we noticed that in Fiji, we lacked bulk waste management. That was just to shift waste from one place to the other or to the landfill. So it took us 3 years to devise a plan and implement bulk waste transportation for Fiji. So and we implemented it, it worked very well. Then we saw there was a lack of segregation. So the biggest kind of waste that we saw was green waste. It'd be mixed together with white goods and your plastics and everything else. So we started a pilot program with one of the municipal councils, and we actually made a proposal to government as well that we want to run a transfer station in which segregation would have been a big part of it. But once again, what happened is that we were successful with the pilot. We ran it for a couple of years, but unfortunately, it didn't end up anywhere where we could get to the place where it would function properly, and we'd be able to segregate all the waste, and then it being disposed properly. So there was a big challenge, and in that, what we found out is that what's happening to the waste that is in the rural areas. So as a company, we started working with the Ministry of Health locally, and providing, and Ministry of Health would have cleanup campaigns. So we joined the cleanup campaigns and got word out to all the peri-urban and rural areas that we could reach to provide sustainable services, because they were discarding all of their waste directly into the ocean. So we wanted to capture it. So now you kind of could see that our biggest problem is actually firstly just capturing the waste which was discarded directly or not being discarded appropriately. So that was our largest challenge. And I can definitely say that we've done quite a very good job working with the different government agencies and getting the word out and being able to do that. So after we finished all those phases, we tried again to see if we could actually do something with the plastic waste, and we could recycle or find a means of doing resource recovery and shipping it overseas. But we do not have the volume here to make it feasible as a business concept. So kind of here in this panel, what I'm also looking for are ideas on what can be done here with what we have, not just in recovering it, but also, reutilizing it or recycling it or, upcycling or whichever we can do that would help us here in the Pacific. So that being said, I just kind of want to shine this concept. You've heard TFFC, which is, what we are working on now is doing commercial composting and green waste management. So I've been trying to drive that and get it done for the past 3 years. So far it's going fairly well. We've hit a few roadblocks, but I'm hopefully that by the end of this year, we'll get it over the line. But we went and we were meeting with farmers, and sugarcane farming is fairly big in Fiji. And what we found out is, so all the herbicides and the pesticides bottles, once the farmers use it, they basically chuck it in the field. And now that's in Vanuatu and Viti-Levu, the two largest of the islands. And those bottles then end up in the harvesters, in the machines. They get shredded and they go in and basically end up in the mill. So it creates problems, for the equipment that harvests and also the equipment that processes at the sugar mill. The other aspect is when it rains heavily, the cans that end up in the streams end up in the rivers and basically float out directly to the ocean. Now, so these are like the challenges that we have. When I was in the US, if you sell oil, and that's any kind of motor oil, it's the responsibility of the retailer or wholesaler to be able to accept that container and the used oil back. And here we do not have any of those, right? So a lot of things end up in the ocean or into places where they shouldn't. So like I said, there are incentives by the government, but the pathway of trying to make a change or do things are not very clear. So, there kind of needs to be more clear, what do you call it, like pathways or system where we can kind of see, okay, this is what we want to achieve. This is what we can bring to the table, and here are the experts on getting things done. So I see, Southern Cross University is actually helping us quite a bit with our soil testing equipment and things like that for our green waste facility. So, we are definitely trying to reach out and do the right thing. And there are a lot of people, like companies, for example, we talked about segregation, is we have companies that we approach and let's say, let's segregate, and they're willing to do it. You'd be surprised. Individuals are willing to do it, but in the municipal system, there's no system of basically segregating your waste and then sending it over. But let's just say you do segregate your waste and send it over. The problem is there's nothing to do with the waste. So they all end up at the landfill, right? So it's kind of, so I just kind of see from my end that we have fixed problems, we have figured things out, but kind of getting us over the line into figuring out, okay, what can we do with the product and do it locally, or, have a partner we could ship to, but then with the current shipping costs, how do we weigh it out as a business that it becomes sustainable? So that is kind of where I think Fiji and other nations in the South Pacific stand. So that's my 2 cents into the matter, and really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Mr. Chand, for sharing your views. With this, we come to the end of our panel discussion today with our esteemed panelists. So thank you all very much for sharing your immensely informative views. We would now like to begin with the Q&A session. So we have received a couple of questions from the audience as well. So we will pose the questions randomly to each speaker. So first, I would like to throw a question to Ms. Shobha Raghavan. So the question is, what is the problem with single-use plastics and how does it affect the marine ecology?
Yeah, thanks, Vishali. Single-use plastics, I think, are being used immensely in the current lifestyle, starting from straws to paper cups to paper from plastic cups, plastic spoons, different plastic cutlery, and it has become the culture of today's lifestyle. And we don't realize that these are so lightweight that while we're all at center of big urban jungles, we don't realize that these plastics can tend to move from the land to the closest water body, which can just be a pond or a lake, and then also head to a river and then finally to the ocean. So when people talk about marine ecology, marine pollution, they are not able to connect, and they say our cities are 500 kilometers away from the ocean, but they don't realize that this is so lightweight plastic, the single-use plastic, that it can get carried away through air and different water channels to the bigger oceans, and we realize that the ecology is affected, marine ecology is affected, and it's also it becomes part of our food life cycle. So there is no second option to a big mindset and behavioral change that has to come from each one of us as responsible citizens of this planet.
Thank you. The second part of the question is if you can share your views on adoption of alternates and consumer mindset change.
Yeah, Vishal. So it is it's not so difficult. I think we've done it when we were younger, when this kind of throwaway consumerism wasn't there. We have to bring our own bottles, bring our own cups. And even if you want to go and take food from the takeaway, it's good to take your own boxes and pick up your food. It's about planning a little in advance to carry these containers of yours. I feel it's more hygienic also. We have done it in the past and we just need to do it. It maximum is another 250 grams in your bag that you carry around to your workplace or your shopping place. So bringing your own reusables is the only way forward. And I think this is, if once people start this mindset change and try to show to the next generation that they are being very responsible, I think it will move like a movement. And we have seen that the pandemic has really thrown us back 10 years with respect to our responsibilities towards the environment. And we were 3 years back much better with respect to SUPs, but now we realize that again the pandemic has brought again the fear in everyone that we should not use reusables, and the plastic containers have again come into action. So let's be conscious that there is a big pandemic coming because of the environment, because of the plastics that we are contaminating into the environment. It's not difficult. It's about trying it the first time and then building it as your culture and then spreading it as much as possible to your own communities and giving them the benefits of what it means to carry your own reusables. And please refuse. You can very. It's time that we are no more polite. We have to just be firm and strict about that. We do not want to use SUPs, period.
Thank you. Absolutely. Very well said. So I would now pose my next question to Mr. Les Robinson. So my question is, with nearly 1.1 million tons to 2.4 million tons of plastic entering the marine environment, so do you think imposing littering fines will be of any help? Will it be a good idea to protect our environment? Mr. Robinson.
Okay, Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So, all right, the problem with fining is that it doesn't really alter the behavior. People just do it somewhere else. So if they feel that they're being watched at that very moment and that they could be fined right then they'll avoid doing it, but it doesn't really make a difference to their long-term behavior. Also, if you want to fine people for littering, you are going to have to enforce those fines forever. You will have to have police and rangers continually enforcing it forever. So it does have one good side, and that is that it promotes talk. You get articles in the newspapers, you get articles on television, so it promotes talk. It gets people thinking about littering, but it doesn't actually have a very big effect on the individuals who are littering. It's much better to make it easy to dispose of your litter by having the right bin system in the right place, for places to look really clean and well organized and neat and loved by their communities, and then to have role models showing the right behavior. So I don't recommend using fines as a way to control littering.
Okay, thank you for your views.
Okay.
Next question is for Miss Ricky. So, Miss Ricky, how do you think countries in the region can work together to speed up the reduction of plastic manufacturing?
So, $1 million question, of course. It's, as I mentioned in my presentation, it's very much about the governments working together with the help and the voice of the community and the businesses to actually help do the reduction in the particular plastic items that are high volume. So like Helen was outlining in her presentation about the particular items that you can switch from this to that and the alternatives, it's actually about giving the manufacturers an opportunity to change what they are producing so they don't lose their livelihood, because they're worried about how they're going to make money. They've been, manufacturing plastic bags since, whatever day. What are they going to do instead? So it's about the manufacturers going back up the line and working with the manufacturers from a government and other businesses and communities to give them options of how they can tool up with their machinery to change over to a different product. And this is long-term systemic change. It's going to take a long time because some of them have got millions and millions of dollars or pounds or whatever, the rupees or whatever it is, invested into their businesses. So the only way you can drive the change from the manufacturer is by offering them also alternatives of what they can do. And that is really, really hard. That is needing a lot of drive up and down the way with the alternatives that they can then switch over to, whether it be sugarcane or whether it be cloth or whether it be glass or whether it be metal or something that is not going to be impacting the marine life and getting into the oceans and actually releasing toxins into the atmosphere and the environment. So the manufacturers are the ones that we need to work with to help them with that plastic reduction, and it needs a whole strategic plan on how to do that. And that's one of the things that we look at a lot in the work that we're doing, is how can we go up and down the supply chain to help people. It's sort of, we call it our own circular economy. It takes the business, the community, the government, and then the individual in the middle. How do we make that change? And that would be my answer to that question.
Thank you. Thank you for your views. You rightly said that this is a long-term process and it will take time to, help in reduction of plastic manufacturing. So moving on, my next question is to Dr. Helen. Dr. Helen, please share your views on the importance of the extended producer responsibility, not only regarding the improved waste management, but also as a transition to the circular economy.
Thanks, Vishali. Yes, I think EPR is very important. For those who don't know, EPR is normally a regulated approach to make manufacturers responsible for products at the end of their life. So not just putting them out in the shops, but actually being responsible for what happens after that. And look, I used to be a big fan of voluntary programs. I guess I still am, but they can only go so far. And if the problem isn't going to be solved voluntarily, then there's a need for regulation. And EPR can do two things. If it's focused on recovery and improving recycling, then it can do two things. One is it can provide funding for programs. So if there is a challenge with collecting and sorting and processing a particular plastic product, the market's not going to do it because there's no money to be made from it, or it's particularly complex, then making manufacturers responsible, building up a fund that can be used to pay recyclers or pay the sorters or pay the pickers or whatever the case may be. But that also has an indirect impact where if a company is responsible for recycling, they're more likely to design something so that it can be easily recycled at the end of its life. And we've seen that happening. But the other thing I should mention, it's becoming a much more flexible and more useful tool. I'm very keen to see what the Indian regulations are, and I'm going to be looking them up the moment I get offline. But the European Single-Use Packaging Directive requires EPR in a lot of different facets. It's requiring companies to not only fund recycling of single-use plastics, but to fund litter cleanups. It's also mandating recycled content requirements. It's also mandating tethered caps. So it's much more directly impacting on design. And the fact that they're requiring funding for litter cleanups, I think, is really, really interesting, because that is really going to the heart of some of the problems with single-use plastics, and will hopefully drive those changes in design, whether that's elimination or redesign, that we need to see as well. So yeah, definitely a very important and increasingly important part of the solution, Vishali.
Thank you. Now my next question will be for Mr. Sanjeev. So Mr. Sanjeev, Pacific Island countries are facing critical challenges in managing the waste because of the changing lifestyles and the concentrations of the populations in urban areas. So how do you think the long-term impact will be on the overall problem of the issue, and how it can be, addressed by establishing better waste management systems in Pacific Islands?
I guess that's another one of the million-dollar questions. The first part of the question you mentioned, the saturation being in the urban areas, and that's mostly due to the tourism. But what also happens is that the tourists move around to the rural areas as well, and the peri-urban areas. So you have people that are trying to cater for them, and that's where, besides the volume of waste they generate, it would actually increase pretty substantially to be able to cater for them. Now, in the urban areas, let's say the municipal councils and it would be hotels and resorts, they manage the waste, and the managing is basically you put it in a container and then it's shipped off, or it's taken off, transported to landfill or to a rubbish dump. Now, I do know that the tourism sector is big on segregation and trying to recycle. But then again, is what I mentioned earlier, is once it leaves that premises, it pretty much ends up in the same place, because there are very few places that it can go to. So not just plastic, glass bottles, and then everything else basically falls under that category. If you look at green waste from resorts as well, so I have not come across any hotels or resort that actually have an active composting facility that caters for that, so that they could actually use it in their gardens or on their property. Most of them are actually kind of just discarded. So the problem that I see is, what was mentioned earlier about the behavioral changes, and also the legislations for companies, I'd say, or the industry for Fiji to actually look at and understand what is happening with the waste that they're generating, and then also assisting in coming up with solutions so they are handled better, and that goes to all the waste streams. So from my opinion or my take, like I've mentioned earlier, is we have tried to go step by step, which is first make it so that we were a player in the market in terms of business that is capturing a bigger portion of the market, and then we got into consolidation of waste, because it's all about transportation. So then we said, okay, now consolidation also has to deal with a transfer station and a place where things can be segregated. And now we have taken an active approach in saying, okay, identify a waste that we can do something with, and then we are trying to do it. So there are a lot of people, I think, companies in Fiji that are kind of moving in that direction. But just because of the amount and the volume of things that are there, it's kind of hard. But at the rate that it is being generated, so yes, like, you could, it wouldn't be too long before we do see a hill that's bigger than the greenery and the scenery that you kind of see in the pictures and videos of Fiji, and why people come to Fiji. And I really hope that we do find a solution. So the good part is the waste is being managed and disposed in an area as it should, but that being contained so it doesn't leach into the marine ecosystem, that is actually a bigger challenge now. And I guess fixing that, and also finding a real sustainable recycling for the products or for the waste that is generated is the bigger thing that we have to deal with.
Absolutely. Thank you for your response. So my next question is for Ms. Pratibha. So Ms. Pratibha, according to you, what is the role of the industry in reducing the amount of plastics ending up in the marine environment? And also, how do you think the government can support in elimination and reduction of plastic packaging waste?
So role of the industry, I think I'm going to split it into industries in terms of brands that are actually firstly adopting or taking up the final product from manufacturers such as us as well, where I think the demand for recycled material should, increase. But again, that's tied in with policies. And, as I mentioned earlier, that the policies have just about strengthened up in India at least. And we have definitely seen a big uptake in the products as well, and specifically PCR products. So yeah, I think, and I think sometimes brands probably don't realize that customers are ready for material which might not look as good, but is sustainable. So I think that is something maybe that they need to go back and have a look at as well, assess whether the market is ready for some products like this, which I think it is. So that's one. The other thing is maybe for industries such as us that are actually using the PCR material or making the PCR material as well, where what we tend to do is we have the right kind of tie-ups with our final customers as well. We have different types of customers, I remember, I think Ms. Shobha was talking about earlier that recyclers not taking in material which is black in color or gray in color or brown, etc. And people normally demand natural colors which are not really made, or white colors. Unfortunately, that is a kind of demand that even we see from brands. So a little bit of R&D is required. What we've been doing now is trying and supplying or doing an R&D on products which have maybe a PCR material of black on the inside and a whiter material on the outside, which makes it easier for brands to maybe take up something like that. So I think a lot of R&D over there is required in trying to match up to final customer expectations. Yeah, I think that's the first half of the question. The second half, it was in terms of policies, like you asked. And I think, as I mentioned in my presentation earlier, I think the EPR regulations in India have really strengthened up. They're a bit far achieving, I think, because when you talk about it becoming compulsory, 10 or 15% of material being recycled material that manufacturers or brand owners need to use in their final packaging, the kind of capacity that needs to be built to match up to that demand, which should get created through the policies, is going to be a really tough task. Again, asking for more financial institutes, etc., also to kind of pump in money into the recycling scenario, at least within the country, to again match up with policies. So, but I think policies have really strengthened up. Policies play a very important part over here, because that's the only way that it's kind of flows in from top bottom. If the demand isn't created, there isn't going to be enough on-ground work. So yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Pratibha. So my another question is for Dr. Helen from audience. So can you elaborate about the compostable certifications like FSC, ISO, FDA in Australia?
So for For paper packaging, I'm not aware of a compostability standard, although I know some companies are using the plastic compostability standard or the compostability test standards for paper as well as plastics. I mentioned FSC, which is about sustainable sourcing of fibre, sustainable forestry, and they've also got a recycled content standard as well for paper. For compostable plastic, it's really important that if anyone is aiming to have something composted, and if they're going to make a claim about compostability, that it has to be certified to a relevant standard. In Australia, well, there are two standards, one for industrial composting and one for home composting. Home composting is pretty ad hoc and not always successful, as people like me know. So we're encouraging companies to design to the industrial composting standard, which means that if a resident is allowed to put compostable packaging in with their green waste and it's going off to a commercial composter, that we know it will break down in the right length of time with no hazardous byproducts. So we're really pushing that to try to get right away from terms like biodegradable. We're talking compostable if that's the objective. And if that's the objective, we're talking certified composting or certified compostability. I mentioned the Australian standards, but they're based on international standards. There is also a European standard. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but a lot of manufacturers are manufacturing to that standard or to the relevant American standard. So it's just making sure that we know that if something is designed for composting, that it is actually going to break down in the right period of time and is not going to cause any contamination issues in the compost at the end of the day.
Thank you. My next question is for Ms. Ricky. So with regard to the microplastic collection and processing in the innovation presented, one might or have to also look at the impact of the technology, marine organisms like planktons. So can you share your views on the same, please?
Yes, terrific question. So microplastics, microfibers, nanoplastics, we talk about that quite a lot in our work. And it's what we call the silent enemy, the invisible enemy. People don't see it. They don't believe it because you can't see it with the naked eye. So we have a short film that is, I think it's on YouTube, and I can send a link to you, called Plastic in the Air, which is all about microplastics and about the current situation with microfibers. And we talk about microplastics actually being ingested from the plankton into fish, and the fish ingesting it, and it goes into the fatty tissues of the fish, and then we consume it. And the ecosystem is that, as we talk about a lot, is that we are eating the microplastics and it goes into our body, so it's affecting human health. So for the whole microplastics is that it is every piece of plastic breaks up into microplastics. It doesn't break down, it breaks up because it disintegrates, so we can't see it. So for the question, if they are wanting to know what they can do, if the question is what can I do to reduce microplastics so it doesn't end up on plankton, it goes back to the whole big picture of what are we doing with plastic from the source? How is it being produced? How is it being disposed of responsibly so it doesn't end up in the ocean, because it all ends up breaking up if it doesn't get disposed of properly or not being used at all. So it's kind of hard for me to give a complete answer because I don't know whether the person is doing, I think it's, did you say they're doing some study on microplastics and plankton? Could you just repeat that? Is that what it said?
No, it's not a study. So basically the person wants to understand from you the impact of the technology on ocean marine organisms like planktons. So basically they want to understand your viewpoint.
Yeah, so the technology that we have at the moment to try and reduce microplastics out of the ocean is still in its infancy stage. There is a company called Separtis that have got a project called Catch 22, and they are actually showing how they can remove microplastics out of the ocean, as well as macroplastics and also steel and metal products. And there's a lot of companies out there that are working to see how they can actually try and reduce microplastics out of the ocean. So I'm happy to provide more information on that for the person and other people generally, but it's innovation technology. It is happening. There are a lot of things that are happening in the ocean to try and reduce those plastics, but microplastics. But at the moment, it's trying to stop it getting there in the first place.
Thank you. So my last question is for Ms. Shobha. So how can we motivate rural and illiterate people, especially in India, to stop dumping plastic products into the sea? So any specific incentives you feel can be given to rural people, or any specific education that needs to be provided to them to encourage them to stop, doing the plastic pollution, especially into marine? Any views on that from you, Ms. Shobha?
Yes, very relevant question. But so we work with the government of Karnataka in setting up MRFs in the rural districts of Karnataka. Now, we have seen the reverse of what you have mentioned in your question, that the rural people are more aware of waste. Okay, they are not creating the waste. We are the ones, as urbanites, we are the ones who are creating waste. They are very conscious about their green waste. They just put it in their backyard because they know what the value of manure is. They are mostly into farming and agriculture, so they understand the value of food waste. With respect to plastics, we are consuming. They are not consuming at all. Hardly they use. They have this refilling and reuse concept for many years, and they continue to do it because they can't afford it. Because plastic products are coming at a cost, all the packaging, they can't afford it. So I would not say that they are responsible for dumping and littering in the river ways or banks, but I would rather say how do we enable whatever plastic is being generated over there, how do we help them not litter, and how do we bring in a collection system? So what we are also trying to do through our projects with the government is get a cluster of gram panchayats, villages, to form a sizable amount so that we can set up a material recovery facility and train all the village panchayat and the different waste workers over there and self-help groups to actually go and do door-to-door collection, and then tell them that here is a back-end facility. So if you give your waste to us without burning it, so most of it is small amounts are getting burnt. So giving in the hazards of what plastic burning means, ask them to drop it at a drop-out point or enable door-to-door collection and show them that all this litter is going to a facility which can then be recovered, which then gives them a good air and water to breathe. And we know that when a village is having good air, water and soil, that means we are safe as urbanized because our food is coming from the village side. So I think sensitizing them that their health is very important and their environment hygiene is very important, and contribute to the facilities that will come in the near future, rather than get scared of a factory coming over there and trying to pollute the place. So this is something that we'll have to do, and we have to take confidence with them and tell them that we're only trying to help them, and at the same time we are helping ourselves.
Thank you, Ms. Shobha. Very well said. So with this, we come to the end of our Q&A session. So I would like to thank you all panelists for the extremely insightful discussions today. I hope we all have taken a note of a lot of takeaways from the session today. So with this, I would now like to invite Professor Amanda to share the key takeaways of the session. Over to you, Professor Amanda.
Thank you so much, Vishali, and thank you everyone for your presentations. And I'd like to speak to the audience out there, and how does that page that you have in front of you look like? I've been working hard on one and tried to make a bit of a summary. I'm going to share it with you. I hope you can see that. Vishali, you might be able to confirm that that's shared.
Yes, we can see.
I've got a few little mistakes in there and I didn't catch what everybody said, but this is a little bit of a summary of our masterclass and really highlighted our different speakers and the key points they've made. couple of things I really liked about Pratibha's first presentation was the initiative from Illiterate to use recycled materials in a secondary packaging as a first step. I know there was a much longer list there, but I missed them all. But that highlight is really bringing in that brand owner responsibility into packaging, and with some of the legislation around the India example. Really highlighted also that there were some challenges with recycling different materials, and segregation was really important. Seems to be in India there's good recycling for PETs, but those flexible plastics are really difficult. Also the highlight of the income generation from recycling home plastics was an important point, and dovetails into other recycling initiatives from the home base. Then we heard Ms. Shobha speak, and I missed the name of the campus that you were focused on, but it was really a campus-driven example of reducing single-use plastics. I highlighted there was sort of a stick approach, but also a carrot and stick. I think there was positive gains, but also that monthly reporting was a very interesting point that you raised, and really drilling down into where the problems were in that segregation chain through the campus system. I also really liked the highlight of the recyclers cherry picking and really taking what's easy to recycle to begin with. So what we left is those difficult waste problems, and cherry picking was one of the key terms that you used, and I thought that was a really good example. There was connectivity between those first two talks with the challenges associated with that flexi PE. So I drew a link there. And then we had Les, who came along and gave us some great tips in terms of good practice for behaviour change. And Les, I missed some of them, and I was writing frantically and as you were talking, so I think I missed number 6 or one of them, but it just does highlight that we really need to focus on that community behaviour change with positive outcomes, and use the hero of the positive to instigate behavioural change. Those 5 points, there was another one, I might have been the hero, but the humour and the game, and making it easy and making it visible, making it normal, early adopter approach, you know, beyond the early adopter, where you really pull everyone along in that bell curve to get that change for that major majority of the community. And the key point about, you know, clean places attract cleanliness, and places with litter attracts litter, is another good point where, you know, people care about their environment and letting the environment tell the story and showcase itself, and we can definitely be part of that. Ricky's presentation really linked nicely to Les's as well, coming from a government and business approach and that bottom-up change. I really loved the analogy with the food chain. I was running out of paper in the end there, but I really wanted to go to town on that. So that's a fantastic analogy when it comes to the important roles of individuals, of communities, of government, and the state and national approaches. And I really hear what you say, Ricky, particularly from the Australian perspective, where when we get different policies from different states, it makes it very hard, not only for the consumers and the users, but for people who are producing the plastic materials as well, because when we start getting alternative material regulation coming in, or lightweighting regulation coming in, and that's on a state-by-state basis, it will be virtually impossible for international and global players to comply with a state-based arrangements. So I think that links really importantly to the Fiji and small islands issues, and particularly from the perspective of imported resources. And if the imported resources have to meet criteria for particular countries, it may be better to have a more broader approach, which is agreements with South Pacific nations, for example, where anyone who's working in those nations has the regulation which spreads across the different countries, and then makes the change easier to digest and easier to take up. And then Helen, it was a great introduction to alternative materials. I really liked your sort of key points of avoidance, lightweighting, reuse, and that refill point you made. I think you highlighted there was huge opportunity for that refill. I mean, we also could have bring your own, and I think we're seeing that sometimes in Australia now, even with the takeaway food shops, particularly the locally owned ones, they're allowing people to bring in their own containers. And I know, there's some challenges associated with health and food safety standards and so on, but we need to override those challenges and make sure we are minimizing that difficult plastic and the plastic that's hard to deal with. Redesign, design for recovery, use of recycled plastics, and importantly, those alternatives, we need to make sure we're using sustainably based alternative sources, particularly when it comes to those fiber resources, but also alternatives that are not going to produce a problem down the track. Now, you'll remember, if you were at the first seminar, I highlighted in my presentation the importance of understanding the purpose that plastic was produced in the very first place, the competition to create a material that replaced the use of ivory so we could save the elephants. We don't want to now create an alternative to plastics that's going to, down the track, have some serious problem for us in the future. So that's a really important thing to keep in the back of your mind. And then Sanjeev, your experience and dedication to the Fiji solution for plastic and general waste management is commendable. I think you really highlighted some of the challenges between the municipal areas and the rural areas, and the difficulty of not having waste collection services, and then the community, the lack of ability to take control of their waste because of those limited services that are provided by council. And I totally agree with you. We need local solutions, and those local solutions will also help us reduce our transport miles for plastics. No use, well, it's a lot more expensive in the first place, but it also adds to our consumption of fossil fuels if we're needing to transport plastics and waste materials across oceans to recycling facilities. So those smaller scale facilities that can allow island communities to be self-sustaining in the sense of the capacity to manage their waste, but also create materials that are of use to the communities. And I think that's a really good highlight to say that's where Masterclass 2 is going, where we start to really drill down and look at those alternative materials and repurposing of plastics. So I hope you're going to join Masterclass 2, because we'll really start to see some activities and industry and businesses that are actually using plastic waste to make new and usable materials that also lock those plastics away from continued pollution production into the future. So stay tuned. I think it's in a couple of weeks' time. So keep aware and join our Masterclass number 2. Thank you to everyone who's attended. And another round of applause for our speakers. You all have really unique ways of presenting, but also unique things to say. While saying that, I also think there is a collective energy there that really is focusing on the problem of plastic and dealing with that problem, even though it seems unworldly and incredibly difficult. I think you guys are the forerunners and really help to educate and to provide incentives and support for people who are moving into this environment, whether it be consumers or producers or marketers or material suppliers. Thank you all. I'll just hand back to Vaishali because she might have some closing notes. So thank you, Vaishali.
Thank you, Professor Amanda, for summarizing the discussions held today. You have very well highlighted the important takeaways. So with this, we come to the end of the session. I would now like to invite Mr. Gaurav Vats, Director FICCI, to give his concluding remarks.
Thank you, Vishali. First of all, let me, admire and congratulate the way, Professor Minda, you presented this colorful and creative outcome. I mean, I've not seen this kind of outcome and the takeaway so far, but congratulations on that. So we certainly would like to include this as a picture in our report. So please do share the high resolution picture. Before I share a couple of thoughts, let me share a couple of points which I've noticed. If you look at the arrows, which is behind the list, on the right hand side of his whiteboard. So those arrows, I mean, there are two arrows, which is inward and outward arrows. So that gives a clear message. The efforts should come from both the sides, be it from the government policies, or be it the consumer, or be it, the manufacturer. And the effect will go, if we come with the right approach, the effect will go in both the direction in an equal way, I mean, in the present as well as the future. So we need to take very, very precautionary actions well in advance and on time. Shobha did talk about, I basically, in my opening address, I did talk about the 4 R's. So Shobha, introduced another 2 more R's besides the reduce, reuse, recycle, recover. Shobha did mention about the refuse and the R&D that we need to refuse to accept plastics, from the consumer point of view, and to do more R&D on that. Ricky did talk about, a silent and invisible enemy. So, I would like to add on the, yes, certainly this is an alien enemy that, we need to deal with very cautiously on a very fast track, and there's another point which has come out with the source of generation. So we need to, take control and take a closer view of the source of generation of plastic, as well as to, give an equally emphasize to how we dispose it. So, with this, that today's discussion, I must say, I mean, was certainly not short on ambition. We have heard the expertise of people from diverse background and the disciplines to address the problem of managing plastic waste and how we can control it further. And many of the most important priorities we are in agreement. I just want to share, because there are a couple of minutes are there. So I just want to share 2 examples. I mean, there was a question which Vishali raised about whether we can, introduce the fine. But I certainly believe instead of fine, we can introduce the incentive. So there was a small drive which was there in Delhi, in one of a very busiest shopping arcade and the shopping street. There were vending machine which were introduced, where the tourists or even the shoppers, they need to deposit the plastic bottles in that vending machine, and after depositing certain plastic bottles, they'll get an incentive as a return, as a 1 rupee coin. So I did it myself. So I'm still holding that coin as a prestigious award for me, that I've contributed something to save the environment. I agree, absolutely agree with the Shobha's point of view. It's the rural, it's not the rural, consumer who's spreading the pollution or littering the plastic on oceans and on beaches and all. I mean, it's basically the literate people who are doing it. So we basically can introduce the sort of incentive even for the people, who are for the tourists. I mean, that goes as a suggestion to the Fiji, as if you can introduce the incentive to the tourists who are visiting these places, while returning from the beach, they can deposit the plastics or deposit the waste they have collected, and they can get some sort of credit. And by the time they are leaving that particular country, they can get some sort of an incentive in return. Okay, this much credit they have earned by depositing the plastics and not to litter in the ocean. So it seems that finding long-term solutions to the particular challenge of plastic will require three things, which is improving waste management. Secondly, the government around the world needs to integrate their national waste management strategies. Thirdly, both the consumer and industry need to consider the value of plastics and the need to pay the real cost, including externalities. So today's masterclass is an important milestone in this project. The outcomes of today's masterclass have set the direction of future activities under our project, which is Indo-Pacific Partnerships on Marine Ecology. We will further organize another two masterclasses on circular economy solutions adopted by Indo-Pacific countries and standardizing approaches for measuring the success on 10th and the 24th of August, respectively. So I would like to once again thank everyone for joining today's program, and to all the speakers who have shared their expertise and their thought process. Stay safe and all the best.
Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you very much.
All. Nice
Thank you.
meeting all of you.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you, everybody. Look forward to catching up sometime soon.
Thank you, everyone. All the best.
Thank you, Ricky. Thanks, Les.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.